Hello and welcome to Girlfriends. I'm Danielle Bean. I'm a wife and a mom, and I'm on a mission to help you know your worth as a woman so you can find peace, balance, and joy in family living. This week, we're talking about how to find more time in your week. Who doesn't need that? I know I do. Let's get started. Hey, girlfriend. Thank you so much for joining me here on the newest episode of the Girlfriends podcast. This week, we are taking on this topic of finding more time in your day, in your week, in your year, in your life. This is a problem we all have. I mean, who hasn't found themselves wishing sometimes that there were, 30 hours in a day or 8 days in the week? I think we all feel short on time sometimes. And now that we're kind of full swing into the fall and we're into our new routines and schedules, maybe you've got kids who are back to school, maybe you started new work routines. It's really a time to assess how we're spending our time. And are we being as productive as we could be? But before I start to share some of my ideas, I've got a few different little thoughts that I want to share with you on this topic. Before I do that, though, I want to reiterate something that I talked about in a podcast that was maybe it was a little over a year ago that I did, and I'll link to it in the show notes, which is 5 ways to be more productive. And before I took on that topic, I just wanted to remind you and me of the fact that productivity is not a virtue in and of itself, right? Being busy is not a virtue. So when we talk about finding more time, being more productive, these can be good things and these can be good goals that we have, things that we want to be working on. We want to make sure we're being good stewards of our time, but never fall prey to that trap of thinking that you can earn your self-worth with busyness, with all the good things you're going to do, with the tasks you're going to accomplish. Never look to discern your self-worth there. Because you are a precious child of God. That's where you discern your self-worth, is in relationship with your Creator. And that has nothing to do with what you do. In fact, we can't actually do anything, not without God. So keeping that in mind, I think, can keep things in perspective because, the secular culture will really emphasize this idea of being productive and making the most out of your day and getting ahead in your career and your work, your family, your relationships, like always being productive and always improving. And that can actually be a really exhausting kind of treadmill to step onto. I want to encourage you not to fall prey to that kind of thinking. But that said, we can be good stewards of our time. We are meant to be responsible with the ways we're spending our time, with the work that we're doing each day, and looking to be more efficient and more effective in the ways that we're doing. That is a really good goal to have. So that's what I want to talk about here today. So finding more time in your day can be really simple. I'm going to share some really kind of simple ideas that maybe some of them are no-brainers, but others of them maybe you haven't thought about in this particular way before. So I just want to encourage you to think about which ones of these things, maybe not all of them are going to speak to you, but think about which ones maybe God wants you to kind of focus on in the coming weeks. So I'm going to share I think I've got like a dozen different thoughts written out here, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on each of them, but just sharing these ideas with you. The first step, I think, to, being efficient and being a good steward of the time that you've been given is to have clear priorities. Like, you can't even assess whether or not you're a good steward of your time if you don't know what your priorities are, if you don't know what work you should be accomplishing in any given day or week or month, right? So having a clear idea of what those priorities are and how you should be using your time every day is a great starting place. If you don't know where to begin, we've talked about this before on the podcast. There is a book that I really recommend with a caveat called A Mother's Rule of Life by Holly Pierlot. It was very popular back when, probably 20 years ago. And it's still popular. It's written by this Catholic author and published by Sophia Institute Press. And in it, Holly kind of walks you through this process of having a rule of life, meaning looking at your days and setting up your priorities in accordance with how you're spending your time, right? So looking at how you're spending your time and understanding maybe some of the ways you spend your time aren't actually lining up with what your priorities are or what they should be. And this is what I found was a really helpful exercise when I used that book years ago, was just that exercise of going through and figuring out Like, what are my priorities? Like, basically, our priorities as women will fall into different categories. Like, you have a responsibility to yourself, you have a responsibility to your spouse, to your relationship with God, to your kids, and maybe some form of work, whether that's work in your home or working outside your home. Generally, it falls into those categories, right? And there are also, external relationships, family, friends, your church community, those kinds of things. But all of those things are things that we need to be balancing. And that balance is actually going to look different for everybody. So setting clear priorities means spending some time yourself, figuring out what your priorities are. And if you don't even know where to begin, I would say talk to your husband about it. Or if you're not married, talk to a trusted friend or somebody who you trust as a spiritual advisor who can kind of help you have that perspective on your life. Like, if you're running around feeling frazzled all the time or feeling like you spend your days kind of just putting out fires and you're always feeling not caught up, out of breath, falling behind, that kind of stress and anxiety, like, that isn't what God wants for you. Know that. Like, God does not want that for you. He has in mind a better life for you. And someone on the outside can kind of help you have perspective. Maybe you're running around doing things that you don't need to be focused on, right? But beginning there, making this list and knowing what your priorities are and being clear about that. Also day by day, you can set up your priorities and it might look different each day. But deciding maybe one task each day, this can be a really helpful way of simplifying. Whether or not you set up a mother's rule of life, it can be really helpful to simplify your daily schedule by having one task each day that's your main thing. Maybe it's something you dread. Maybe it's something, awful, a chore that you need to get done or something that you've been putting off for a long time. I've heard this called eating the frog. And what that means is doing first thing in the morning, that thing that you've been putting off that you're tempted to procrastinate about. So finding a way to kind of push yourself into that habit of every day having a priority like that, whatever it is, your number one thing. And maybe it's not something that it's going to be like eating a frog. Maybe it's going to be something you actually enjoy, but knowing each day, like what your main priority is. There's a book I read many years ago. I think it was called The One Thing. It was really helpful because it was saying like, we can only focus on one thing. And so in your work or in your life, you need to be focused on one thing. Like, what is that thing, right? Every human being is called to be focused on, of course, our relationship with our Creator. We're built for God. We're meant for God. We're restless until we rest in Him. But there are all these other priorities that kind of line up after that. And figuring out what those look like for you right now at this stage in your life, it might look different from how it looked 10 years ago. It might look different from how it will look 10 years from now. But do that assessment. Find out what your priorities are and what they should be day by day, week by week, month by month, and frequently enough, reassess that. All right. The second thing I want to recommend is time blocking. Now, this is kind of a popular thing, and you can get all kinds of calendars and apps and things that will help you block time on your calendar. But basically, what it is it's setting up chunks of time in your day that are allocated for certain activities in a general sense. It might be that you're looking to have time for your marriage and you want to put that in there. Maybe you're working on a writing project and you want to have that time blocked off in your calendar. Using AI actually can be a really helpful way to figure out your schedule. Once you've decided what your priorities are and you can kind of put hours to each one of them, say like, I think I should be spending this many hours a week on work. I should be spending this many hours a week just hanging out with my kids or doing something fun with the kids, this many hours a week on housekeeping or whatever. Kind of plug that into AI if you're into that kind of thing. And it can help you to set up a schedule, like can take all those little bits and help you to set up a schedule. If you don't want to use technology to do it, of course, you can do this on your own. Find chunks of time where you want to be focusing on those things and plug them into a calendar. So that was something that I did back when I read that book, Mother's Rule of Life, and applied those techniques to setting up a daily schedule for me. My schedule, and this was the caveat that I mentioned about the book, didn't look like what the authors looked like. Holly Pierlot had a very regimented schedule. Like it was very organized and it was kind of down to the minute and day by day and just very structured like that. I'm never going to be that kind of person. And I knew it even back when I read the book. But what I did was I kind of took this general sense and it really allowed me to set up certain times of the day that were focused on certain activities. And this was kind of good because this was during the time when we were homeschooling and we had a bunch of little kids. We're still homeschooling, but it looks very different around here now. Not a bunch of little kids that were all schooling in different grade levels and trying to maintain the household at the same time. But when we had this homeschooling schedule, and you can do this whether you're homeschooling or not, and you can do it whether you're a stay-at-home mom or not, having times that are set aside, like on this day in the afternoons, I focus on cleaning the living rooms and the bathrooms, right? Like something as basic as that. Like that's something that you want to be getting to every week and you're not finding time for it, then make time in your schedule for it. Maybe it's going to be blocking off time where you spend on emails, right? In my work now, I have certain workflows, certain things that I know I need to do every day, certain things I know I need to do every week, and I work those into my schedule. I don't always follow it perfectly. Life happens. You get disrupted, you get distracted. But that's not a reason for not having that plan in the first place. It can be really helpful to have that set aside. I have just really sweet memories of back when the kids were little and we had that homeschooling schedule. And one of the things that I did was, as part of our homeschooling schedule, Fridays were a lighter day. Like I had each of the kids just do like 3 of their subjects, perhaps. And they all knew that, right? We had a lighter day academically on Fridays, and then we would do like weekly chores. And so the kids fully expected that. It was something we engaged in together as a family. Like, this is a lighter day of schooling. We're going to be focused on some housekeeping and maintenance around the house and, cleaning the bathrooms and bedrooms and doing all of those basic things that you might not otherwise find time for. And I found that was a really helpful kind of, not a super regimented schedule, but just knowing. And also something like, Wednesday afternoons between the hours of 2 and 4, I'm going to focus on getting caught up in my emails, something like that. Having blocks of time like that can be really helpful. And like I said, there are all kinds of apps that can help you to do that if you don't know where to begin, if you feel completely disorganized. A related thing is kind of batching similar tasks. Like I just said, focusing on email. Because think about this, if you're trying to keep up with your inbox, and it can be a losing battle, I know all about it. I've shared with you before that I'm a big proponent of inbox zero, but it really requires being ruthless with your email to get to where you can have inbox zero. And by that, I mean you have 0 emails. I heard years ago somebody describe the idea of just deleting everything that's in your inbox that you're not getting to and starting over as declaring email bankruptcy. And I think it's a really helpful concept. You might be there with your inbox right now that like all these things and you're lost in there. Maybe you need to declare email bankruptcy, clear it all out of there, delete it, archive it, and start anew. But if you're trying to stay on top of your email, going in there like every 5 minutes and checking on your email and trying to reply to certain things is really not a great use of your time. You're going to be using up a ton of time just transitioning between tasks, feeling distracted, feeling frazzled. Much better to have a certain amount of time, whether it's daily or every other day or whatever works for you with the work that you do or with your particular obligations, to just focus on, I'm just going to clear my inbox during this time, right? And I find that's a really helpful thing. And it doesn't have to be about emails. It can apply to anything where it's like, I'm going to have this focus time where I'm just going to spend time with my toddler. I'm going to be spending time on my physical exercise or whatever is a priority for you. Finding that time and then blocking it off and doing like things together. So it might be meal prep. I know some people who are super organized and I'm not there. I aspire to be this person, but let me just share it in case you can be this person who like on Sunday evenings will, make up school lunches for the week, also meal prep for the week. If you know what meals you're going to have, you can chop the vegetables, you can, measure out ingredients, maybe make a sauce ahead of time and really kind of streamline your work throughout the week that way. Doing things together like that, especially like, that example of kitchen tasks. You're only messing up your kitchen one time. That's great. That's a very efficient use of your time. So doing like tasks together can be a really efficient way to find more time in every day or every week. Okay. Create a daily schedule. What does this look like? You tell me. You tell me what it looks like for you. What kind of daily schedule makes sense for you at this stage in your life with what your work is, what your obligations are, what kind of a family you have, or all of it, those different priorities we talked about. Make up the schedule and have it written down somewhere, somehow, whether you're using an app, you're using Google Calendar, or you're using the calendar on your phone, or you're using a paper calendar or a paper planner. Like, people have different ways of organizing this information, and something might work for your friend. That's great, but it doesn't work for you. And I've definitely done this many times where I'll like buy the shiny new planner at the start of the year. And oh, who doesn't love a fresh planner, right? It's a fresh start, either at the start of a school year or the start of at New Year's Day, where you're just beginning this planner. But I'm really not good about paper planners. I can't do it. I can't keep up with it. You know, and I have all these great goals and I'm like putting it on the kitchen counter. I'm like, I'm going to finally be that person who's like following the liturgical year in my beautiful planner. But some people do love a planner and it can be really helpful. So, you know, look for the system that's going to work for you. For me, it's digital. I need to have that Google Calendar. And that way I have access to it on my phone. I have access to it on my computer. Using Google Docs is really helpful to me too. Like if I'm creating a shopping list or something, I'll do it on there. Then I can have it on the go. I can have it on my phone. That kind of thing is really helpful. I also have, this is just a very basic thing that I do, and this might work for you, a very basic to-do list, which is not a piece of paper. And not written with pen. It's digital. It's a Google Doc that I keep, you know, pinned on my browser. And when I'm working, I've got that available there. And I also have it on my phone, easy to access, just to open up that to do. And I'm continually updating that, putting little notes in there, consulting it, you know, things that I don't want to forget to do. And what I like about that digital to-do list is it's a mess. It's fine. I'm the one using it. It works for me the way that it's messy and I'm just, you know, pasting stuff in there or quickly writing a note on the go. But it really works for me because it's a crossover of all my things, right? I've got my personal to-dos in there as well as my work to-dos. And it's very balancing for me to have a place where that's all in one spot. I don't know if that makes sense, but if, you know, something like that is just such a basic, simple, like they're all simple plan where there are all these fancy apps and fancy things that you can do to organize yourself. But I found not a lot of those worked for me. So I think having a daily schedule and kind of keeping track of your tasks in some digital way is what works best for me. Might not be what works best for you. You might really love to write things out, you know, on a physical calendar, put it up. For years we did this. I'm going to mention this because this was a physical list where we had a dry erase board on the refrigerator, and every day I would write out the list of everything that was going on. This is like, you know, when all 8 kids were like under the age of 14 and we were just going in 100 directions every day. And it was really helpful to have like written out like what was on the schedule, who was going where, what the ride was, you know, what's for dinner, whatever. Like the day plan was on there. And I found that saved my sanity a lot too, because other people in the house could consult it. And I didn't have to be telling somebody 20 times, like, you know, Mrs. So-and-so is going to pick you up for practice. No, it was like written on the schedule. And sometimes writing it out was the way to see like there are gaps or things that weren't covered or things that you hadn't gotten to yet or that kind of thing. So having it written out like that for that stage of my life worked great. And I think that was a really helpful way to do it. All right. Next up, I want to mention, I'm going to mention this, eliminate time wasters. What are your time wasters? Oh, you don't have to tell me, but you do have to tell yourself. You have to tell on yourself to yourself. How do you waste your time? Is it Instagram? Is it, just reading the news? Is it just sitting and daydreaming? Is it watching Netflix? Like we all have our things, right? How do you waste time? What distracts you? A lot of times it's digital stuff, right? It's our devices, they're dinging, they're beeping. So first thing that you should do if you're kind of tempted in that direction is if you're going to be doing focused work at any point, if you want to be focused on, working in the kitchen or even just playing with your kids, like turn your phone on Do Not Disturb. Set it so that you're not going to be getting those notifications. You're not going to be pulled away and distracted in that way. But I think, the first step here is to just be honest about what those things are that waste your time. And there's nothing wrong with sometimes just mindlessly taking a break, right? If that's what you do, but know it and realize just how much you can get sucked into it. Really pay attention to how much time you're spending on these different kinds of distractions and, digital devices or entertainment or, any of these things and make sure that it's not something that you're just kind of falling into. Make sure that you're making that plan, right? We were talking about making the plan of your priorities, making the schedule for your day. Make sure those things aren't derailing you. So what are those time wasters? What are those distractions? Find a way to control them in, that's going to feel natural to you, not going to feel like you're depriving yourself. Don't say I can never go on Instagram unless that's what a goal you want. Totally support you if you never want to go on Instagram. But, find out what those things are for you. What are those temptations? What is the thing that you use to procrastinate? One really funny thing that I realized about myself when I heard somebody on a podcast talk about it was that some of us procrastinate with work. Like, what is like, all of a sudden you really need to like deep clean your kitchen because you've got this other thing that you've got to do that you're dreading, right? I do that. Definitely do that. Like a writing project, forget it. My house is going to get so clean, right? You find all of those little things and it feels very, you feel very virtuous. Like, oh, I'm doing good work. I'm accomplishing things. I'm being very productive. I'm doing good things. But no, you're not, because you are not setting up your day in accordance with what you said your priorities were. You are allowing that to distract you. You are procrastinating by using some other good work. And that's actually not allowed either. So pay attention to some of those temptations toward procrastination that you might be prone to. All right. So eliminate those time wasters. Next thing I want to mention is learn how to say no and how to say not now. So this is a very helpful distinction for me because I know we women have such a hard time saying no. We talked very recently on a podcast about this idea of setting boundaries and how terrible we are at it. Like, why are we so bad about setting priorities and enforcing them in our lives by setting boundaries? So this is kind of another way of doing that, right? Because not everybody has a right to your time and attention. And sometimes we act like everybody on the outside of our homes and our families and ourselves, like they seem to get a priority in some way. Like somebody asks you to volunteer for something, you feel this, oh, yeah, I feel obligated to say yes to that, even though, fill in the blank, like what it's going to cost your family, your husband won't like that you're gone on Thursday night or whatever it is. So you remember that you don't owe everybody your time and attention. Like, the first thing we talked about was setting up your priorities, like listing them out, being clear about what your daily priorities are. And if this thing that's being asked of you fits in with those, great. You can feel free to say yes to it, but don't feel like you have to say yes to it. And if it doesn't fit in with those, you owe it to yourself. It's the responsible thing to do. It's the moral thing to do to say no, that you can't do that thing right now. That's how it is. I think we need to be very stingy with our calendars. And sometimes we're not. We also will just sign up for every little thing, right? Like, oh, their kids are signing up for that program. I'm going to get my kids signed up too. Like, I don't want to be kind of like this fear of missing out or this fear of falling behind or something. And sometimes when you've got kids, it can be very tempting to do that. Even with yourself, it can be like people are doing this thing, they're signing up for that. And maybe that's not a priority for you. If it's not, have your priorities clearly outlined and know what they are. And then you'll be much better able in the moment to assess, is that going to work for me or not? And then be very comfortable saying no or saying not now. I think giving yourself permission to say not now, maybe that's not helpful for somebody who's asking you to head up a fundraiser. They need your help right now. You're going to say, I can't right now. That's not something I can commit to. Or, just no, I'm not able to do it. But you could also say not now, like I would love to help with a future project, but right now it has to be a no. But I think telling ourselves that sometimes, because sometimes we'll feel conflicted because it is something we want to do. Maybe it's even something fun that you want to do or a goal that you might want to reach. Like maybe you've got a goal of, starting a podcast. Oh, I hope you do. But, that's something that's going to take time. Maybe now is not the right time for that. And being honest about assessing what your responsibilities are right now at this stage in your life, what time you have for these kinds of projects really is a helpful way of going into it, because then you can say, you don't have to tell yourself, no, I can't do that, right? You can say, not now. Now is not the time for that. And I think that's really helpful because we can sometimes start to feel almost panicky. Sometimes I'll hear from young moms. I remember one young mom one time after a conference came up to me and she had this stroller that I think it had like 4 kids in it, like all different ages and stages and like a newborn. And, it was obviously very much young family life this woman was, fully involved in. And she was telling me how terrible she felt because she wasn't finding time to write a book that she wanted to write, which, I really support, women writers, right? And I really think that's a good goal to have. And if she was feeling like God wants her to write this book, either God is going to show her where the time is, or the time is just not right now. And I think sometimes we start to think like, I have to do all the things at once. And we almost feel in a panic about it. Like just because you can do it all doesn't mean you can do it all at the same time. That isn't what it means, right? You can have it all. You can't have it all at the same time. You need to choose like what your priorities are. And so understanding that I think is really helpful. So sometimes you're going to say no to things, but sometimes you're going to say not now. And that's okay. It means that is a priority for me. I do value that. I do have that as a goal. but it's not a good fit right now. It feels actually much nicer than telling yourself or stressing out about not fitting it into your days right now and, feeling bad about kind of falling behind in whatever that goal is or telling yourself you can't possibly do it ever. So that's a nice thing to remember, that you can say no and you can also say not now. All right. The next thing I want to mention is delegating tasks. Did you know you can do this? Yes, you can. So, as basic as giving your kids chores, and I totally understand why you might not want to give your kids chores because it's rough, right? It can be hard to teach them to do things properly. But I can tell you that investing some time in teaching them, first of all, it's a gift to them. This is part of what you're called to do as their parent, is teach them basic life skills, right? Teach them how to do laundry, teach them how to make a grilled cheese sandwich, teach them how to take out the trash. But these things, they aren't going to do them perfectly in the beginning, and they're going to need your guidance. And then sometimes even when they're teenagers and they know how to do it perfectly, they're not going to do it perfectly because they don't care, or they're lazy, or they're rebelling against you. And there's that time investment too of enforcing what the chore is and outlining for them, teaching them first the step by step. And I did this in a very deliberate way when my kids were younger. There were certain chores where I wrote out kind of a task list, whether it was emptying the dishwasher, trying to teach a 5-year-old how to do that is, it's a step-by-step process. Or like doing a load of laundry or something like that, where I wanted to make sure they had followed each of those tasks, and they didn't do it perfectly. It definitely was a work in progress, but I found that kind of making that investment of teaching really paid off in the long run, because then they learned these basic skills. They learned how to do these things. They gained confidence in doing them. And then that, ta-da, frees you up, right? It frees you up because then you're not the only one who can make dinner or do the laundry or clean a bathroom or whatever it is. But I totally understand that takes a discipline and it takes a time investment at the outset. But so that's one way of delegating. Another way of delegating is just to ask for the help that you need. Maybe you're going to ask your husband to help with something. Maybe you're going to ask a good friend to help with something. Maybe you're going to ask your mom or a neighbor. Maybe you're going to hire somebody. You're going to hire a babysitter or a house cleaner. You can outsource pretty much anything these days, whether it's like organizing and answering your emails or doing your house cleaning or shopping, even. Like there are all these different things. Like if it's a task that's, an errand to run or something like that, there's somebody who can do it for you. Of course, you're probably going to have to pay for it, unless you can work out an arrangement with a friend or something like that. But ask for the help you need, and in whatever ways are appropriate or that you're able, delegate those things. Back when I was a mom who was pretty much always like nursing a baby, I remember someone gave me the advice once that when you're trying to figure out like what to do during your day and you're feeling kind of overwhelmed, start by doing the things that only you can do. And when you're, have a newborn, like nursing the baby, that was something that only I could do. So prioritizing that made sense. And if I was doing that, it was enough. Like those other things, other people can do, or they can be taught how to do, or, we can kind of make do until I can get to it. But I found that was a really helpful way of kind of framing things. Like, what are the things that only I can do? And if you've got a big, long list in your house of things that only you can do, then that's a problem. You need to be sharing that list. You need to be sharing the wealth of information, educating other people in your household with how to do it. So find some ways that you can ask for the help you need, hire the help you need, trade for the help you need, delegate these tasks that can free you up in the long run. I know it takes an investment of time, but it is totally worth it. All right. Next, I want to just mention setting time limits. This is something I think that we don't maybe think about often enough. Like when we're going to work on a project, we think like, I need to work on this project. It's going to take me, all afternoon to, clean out the garage or whatever, is on your list. And it doesn't have to be that way. You can say, I'm going to spend 1 hour on this task, and wherever I am at the end of an hour, that's good for now. And then, I'm going to switch up and move on to something else. This is related to my next tip, which is taking regular breaks, because our work suffers the deeper we're going into it, right? The longer that we spend focused on a particular task, that it degrades, right? We become tired. We feel distracted. We're not performing to the same level as we were when we were fresh and rested going in. So set time limits on what you're going to do. And those breaks can really be a helpful way to kind of break up what you're doing, refresh you, maybe inspire you with new ideas toward what you might be working on if there's a work project that you're doing. The Pomodoro Technique, let me see, I wrote it down because I haven't done it in a little while, but I have used this. I don't know if you've heard of it, but the Pomodoro Technique is like a scientifically proven way of efficiently doing work. And the way that it works is you work for 25 minutes, you set a timer, and then you take a 5-minute break, work for another 25 minutes, take a 5-minute break. And then once you've done that 4 times, you take a longer break of 15 to 30 minutes. And I find this is really helpful. I wrote a whole book using this Pomodoro technique, and you can, there are a million apps. You can find one that'll do the timer for you. But what's really helpful is that idea of those regular breaks, because you're really going to commit to focusing in for those 25 minutes because you're getting a break at the end. And by break, I don't mean like you get to have an ice cream sundae. I mean, maybe, but, just walk around your house, go like do something different, step outside for a minute, get a cup of coffee, stretch, taking that break physically and mentally really helps you to go back to your work and focus again for the next 25-minute kind of stretch of time. So that's one that I find really helpful. And I'm actually glad that I'm doing this podcast because it reminded me of that technique. And it's something I'm going to start incorporating more. All right. Next thing I want to mention is if you want to be finding more time in your day, if you want to be more efficient and productive day by day, you need to be taking care of yourself. What do I mean? I mean, you need the basics like drinking enough water, getting enough sleep, eating nutritious foods, exercise. And by exercise, I don't mean you have to do an official exercise program, going for a walk, right? Taking care of yourself in some of these basic ways, is a way of being more efficient because you're going to be working better. You're going to be working more productively when you're healthy, when you're refreshed, when you're rested. Think about like those mornings after you've had a terrible night and you're kind of dragging yourself through the day. Those are not your most productive moments, right? So don't be living every day like that where you're sleep deprived or not eating well or, not exercising and not drinking enough water. Like, make sure that you are at 100% to be able to give 100% to the tasks in your day. All right. Last thing that I want to mention is to set realistic goals. So this is kind of the last point that I want to make about finding more time in your day is that when you're setting these goals for how productive you think you should be, this kind of goes back to our original point. Like sometimes we set this ideal, this perfection as kind of our goal. And that's not really fair to ourselves because life isn't perfect. You're going to fall short of that and you're going to wind up feeling frustrated or like you're a failure or, so setting up realistic goals for what makes sense for you. If you are perpetually feeling behind, if you perpetually feel like you are not crossing all of the list, all the tasks off your list every day, then maybe there are too many tasks on your list. Maybe you need to cut that down a little bit. Be realistic about what your goals are, as well as your own capacity, your own need for recreation, your own need for, communicating and investing in your relationships with your husband, with your kids, with your friends and your family. Like know that you are a human being and all things we do through the grace of God. He gives us the ability to do all these things we might accomplish. And it pleases him to do good work through us. And it pleases him when we are willing and cooperative with the good work that he wants to do in us. But that requires being realistic about what that good work is. And if you're not sure, bring that to prayer. If you're not sure what your priorities should be, or if you should be doing a particular work right now, or if you should commit to a particular obligation right now, then ask God, right? Don't ask yourself. Bring it to prayer. Ask God, in what ways he's calling you to use your time more efficiently, how he's calling you to be a good steward of the 24 hours that he gives you each day. All right. Those are my kind of random thoughts, my little ideas for ways to find more time in your day. But you might have some thoughts to share on this topic. What works for you? How are you a good steward of your time? How are you working in your days and balancing your different priorities? I would love to hear from you. If you're watching here on YouTube, you can leave a comment right below. If you're listening on audio, you can always email me, Danielle at daniellebean.com. I would love to hear from you also over at goodcatholic.com, where all these episodes of the Girlfriends podcast are always published. So you can connect with me in all of those places. Let me know your thoughts and your ideas on this topic. All right, we've got more of the show coming up for you, but first we're going to take a quick break. I'm Danielle Bean, and you're listening to the Girlfriends podcast.
Stress and anxiety cripples us because it prevents us from being able to take the steps forward that we need to take. My name is Dr. Mario Sakasa. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and over the course of my career, I have tried to integrate the riches of our Catholic faith together with just what psychology and counseling theory actually say about healthy relationships and about a healthy psyche and healthy mind. If you've been struggling with stress and anxiety and haven't really known where to turn to, that's what this course is for. And so how this course is going to help you is that it's going to help you to think through your own stress response, but it's also going to equip you through skills that we work on together throughout the course, whether that's breath work or through prayer exercises or meditation exercises that we do throughout the course, to help you to be able to overcome your specific stress response. So the course is both educational, that you're going to grow and learn a lot about how you respond and how you're going to overcome it, while also being able to do some guided exercises together that's going to make it very practical for you to be able to utilize the lessons that we incorporate throughout this course. Everybody struggles with stress and anxiety, but not everybody knows where to go to. What are Catholic resources that are going to actually help us overcome stress and anxiety? If that's you, this course is for you.
Welcome back. We're at the point in the show where I like to share a little bit of listener feedback from you. So this week I heard from Sarah, and here is what Sarah wrote to me. She said, "Dear Danielle, I loved your recent podcast about your top 5 best books. I'm halfway through East of Eden based on your recommendation, and I'm really enjoying the excellent literature." I'm so happy, Sarah, that you are reading that. That's great. I would like to recommend a book I read recently. It is called The Hawk and the Dove by Penelope Wilcock. I loved it so much. I read it again after I finished it. I don't think I've ever done that before. The stories of the monks really touched my heart. It made me laugh and cry. I hope that you can check it out. God bless you, Sarah. Okay, so I have the link to that book over on Amazon, and I'm going to put it in the show notes over at goodcatholic.com. If anybody else wants to check out The Hawk and the Dove, I'm adding it to my list. I might listen to it if it's available on Audible. That seems to be my most efficient way here today in the podcast, talking about making the most of our time each day. I find Audible is a way that I'm able to read more efficiently and effectively, even as I'm busy doing things. So I'm going to check it out on Audible if it's available there. And I'm going to put the link in the show notes to anybody else who wants to try out that book. And yeah, thank you, Sarah, for taking the time to write to me, but also for mentioning that podcast about, I think I called it 5 books that changed my life. And I just shared, titles that had a lot of meaning for me, and they were kind of all over the map. Different things. East of Eden was the one literary book, the fiction book that I shared there. And I'm really thrilled that you're reading it because it's definitely worth your while. So many beautiful, not explicitly Catholic themes, but absolutely 100% Catholic themes in that book. So anybody else who's reading that, I would love to hear from you. I'd also love to hear from you about what you are reading. Over at Good Catholic, we are working hard to put together an app that's going to be sharing community with you. And one of the things that we are going to be sharing in the community is book clubs. So regular ways that we can be reading together, sharing together. I think this is such a great way for us to connect together as Catholic women. So I would love to know what is on your list. What books are you enjoying? Whether they're modern ones or classics or spiritual books or how-tos or self-improvement. Tell me what's on your reading list. So again, you can always email me, Danielle@daniellebean.com. All right, that's all the time we have for today, but I want to thank you for being here. Thank you so much. It really means the world to me that we get to spend this time together here on the podcast each week. I love the community that we are, and I love that you share some of your precious time with me every week right here on Girlfriends. Thank you so much for that. And until next time, I hope you enjoy your day and God bless your week.